Welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast, where all your dreams come true. So glad to have you here joining us. Today, we are going to talk about the Toronto real estate market. We're going to start by looking at the macro level, the bigger picture, and we're going to look at interest rates and what the perception may be going forward. And perception sometimes is more important than reality and how that may impact the market. And then we'll actually look at what actually transpired in August and how on a shorter term, meaning as we move into the fall market, that could impact what we're about to see. Always difficult to anticipate what's going to happen in Toronto real estate, especially these days, but we're going to do our best to break it down. My name is Ralph Fox. I'm the co-founder and broker of record of Fox Marin. And today we have my lovely associate, Smiley, as always, partner in crime, Kori Marin. Kori, so good to have you here.
Good morning, Mr. Fox. How are you?
Indeed, it is a good morning. I'm already on my second coffee. Are you on your second as well?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's been a busy morning already.
Indeed, it has. So we're going to start to talk a little bit about the bigger picture right now. We're going to put up some slides. Shout out, especially on this portion of our conversation, goes to Ben Rabideau from Edge Realty. We are leaning on some of his data that he provided. And then as we talk about the Toronto real estate market, we're going to move into a lot of information that was sourced by TRREB and some of our own boots on the ground experiences and intuitions based on what we're seeing across the entire city. And before I begin, I would be very remiss to say that if you're not following us, please be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. And as we go along, if you have any questions or comments, we would absolutely love to hear.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to start. We're going to go into my favorite topic, Bank of Canada, the Fed, and interest rates. If you're following what's happening in the United States right now or have been over the last few months, very, very interesting. There definitely is a narrative that we can expect rates out of the U.S. to fall somewhat, I think, dramatically. There's been a lot of pressure between U.S. independence of the Fed and the political apparatus. But there definitely has been a very strong call to drop interest rates dramatically there. In May, there will be a new chair of the Fed. It looks like rates are going to be locked in coming down out of the U.S. for the next couple announcements. And I think it's going to put pressure on Canada to do the same for a whole host of reasons, let alone the fact that our economy is really struggling. And we're going to talk about that in a second. I think the most important thing to understand is we've seen here in Canada a dramatic shift. In mid-August, there was about 25% chance priced in of a reduction on the upcoming Bank of Canada announcement September 17th. Now that is up to 90%. So that is really significant. We're going to bring up this chart here, which is the expected path of the Bank of Canada rate cuts. And they're calling, and this is based on a consensus of all of the banks, they're calling for by the spring to be down to about 225 basis points. We're currently at 2.75. Overnight lending rate. I've read a report recently by the Bank of Montreal that's calling for us to be at about 225, about 75 basis points lower than where we're at now. And they're actually calling for 150 basis points lower out of the US. So we'll talk about why we're seeing that, but there's definitely a lot of downward pressure on interest rates, and the consensus is really, really changing. And I don't think 25 basis points is going to swing the market here in Toronto one way or another on this upcoming announcement. However, the perception or the change in consensus of additional falling rates and where we could be in a few months' time, I do think will have an impact, at least on some buyers, and I think it will stimulate further demand. Kori?
So the next rate announcement is September 17th, which I believe is next week already. So just pay attention to that. And my question for you, Ralph, is who do you think pays attention to rates the most in terms of the buyer class in Toronto? Is it mover-uppers? Is it first-time home buyers? Is it people on a variable or a combination of those?
I think you're going to see, and this is an interesting answer that just came to mind with that question. I think you're going to see the bank of mom and dad really thinking about that. I think they're going to be looking a little bit more into the future. And as you know, Toronto is so impacted by parents and parents supporting and actually influencing their kids to move forward with real estate purchases. So I think they'll be looking at it. I think anybody having a conversation with a mortgage broker, a trusted advisor, it will be coming up in conversation. I think anybody just who reads or follows real estate or channels like this will start to see more and more talk of not just an upcoming rate reduction, but a series of them, which may impact their ultimate decision as to if they want to move forward. And one of the things we're seeing a lot of is there is a lot of people sitting on the sidelines right now who are holding off purchasing, but are in a position to do so. And one of the things that just never always continues to just shock me is how much money is actually in Toronto sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, completely agree. Let's move on here. Let's talk all about GDP.
So I think what's really interesting is just when you look at Canada versus the US over the last 10 years, and you use the US as a benchmark to look at our economic output versus the US. So interesting, this is a very well-known chart for people who are paying attention. But if you go back to 2015, our real GDP growth, meaning per capita, per person, was in line with the US. And now you can see we're in a massive divergence. And that just doesn't come down to GDP. If you look at the loonie, the strength of our dollar, we were close to parity in around that time. And you've seen, again, a dramatic drop of our purchasing power relative to the US dollar. If you look at standard of living, if you look at a whole bunch of other metrics, some of which we'll talk about, we're really suffering here in Canada. And so you can see that we are seeing continued drop. Now, some of this has to do with some of the tariff nonsense that's been going on, but you will see that there's a lot of pressure on our economy as it continues to underperform relative to other economies. In this instance, we're talking specifically about the US.
We were just in the States. Don't judge us for that. We were there for a conference, and gosh, it was really depressing to do the conversion between the Canadian and US dollar when we were there. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this wasn't that expensive. I'm like, oh my God, what am I thinking? This is like another, 35% on top of the
Yeah.
spend cost? Crazy.
Anyone who's traveled to the US or been to destinations where money is denominated in US dollars, you just you just don't even want to do the math.
It's
Just keep
depressing.
going and deal with your credit card when you get back.
Yes. All right, moving along here, Ralph. Why don't you speak to this? This is definitely in your wheelhouse.
For sure, this is just looking at a Canadian GDP growth. We were down 1.6% over the last quarter, the second quarter. And so we are seeing a dramatic pullback now. Again, some of that was caused by, a once in a lifetime event like this tariffs nonsense that's going on. And so because of that, it was anticipated, not necessarily a shock. But again, it's just showing the weakness in our economy, not over 10 or 15 years, but just what we've experienced over the last quarter. The US, their GDP was up. I don't think it was per Canada. It might have been nominal, but it was up 3%. So again, we're definitely continuing to lag here in Canada. And I would expect that to continue given the current trajectory of our country.
I just find it frustrating that this is not front and center of the conversations on mainstream media and some of their outlets, because this really is the anchor to our economy and no one understands this or talks about this. And I feel like we should be really embarrassed by these numbers.
Yeah, I think it's more about following a political narrative based on emotions rather than fact. And we do see it every day in our business because we're having intimate lifestyle and personal conversations with people looking to make moves, physical moves or financial moves, given their circumstances. And I think it's really fair to say that people are under a lot of duress. People are really stressed. They don't necessarily know why because they're not thinking about the impact of 10 years of stagnation, but it really is impacting people. And I think people are trying to navigate the situation, but it is going to continue on this path, at least for the foreseeable future, unfortunately.
All right, moving on here, Ralph, to labor productivity and these charts that Edge Realty has provided.
Yeah, I mean, there was a big announcement, I think it was about a year ago, from the Bank of Canada, where they basically came out and said that our labor productivity is in just a terrible situation. They said it's a break glass emergency. I think relative to the entire OECD, we're dead last. And so we really just aren't producing per capita what we should be. I think there's a ratio how they calculate it, where if you take the total GDP and you divide the amount of hours worked, there's a ratio that comes out, and cumulative hours worked by Canadians. And I think there's a ratio that comes out, and we are just abysmal on the productivity side. And this isn't from me, this is actually from the Bank of Canada. And so that's a real issue with our economy. And again, I don't think it's anything that's going to be addressed, at least in the foreseeable future. And then this chart here, and this is something that, I think you and I really feel, Corey, is if you look at investment in machinery, equipment, and R&D as a share of GDP, look at that. There's
Great.
no real business case to have a business or to be investing in your business in an environment like we are in Canada. And the small business owners, it's something that we see and feel as well. It's not something that's encouraged. It's not something that's stimulated by taxes. And so we're in a real situation here where our economy is continuing to struggle. And if you look at all of the indicators, you're going to see this is going to continue for a long time to come. It's just something to be aware of if you want to live in Canada. That is something that a reality that we're going to have to deal with for the foreseeable future.
I think we should do our own Fox Marin productivity chart.
I think we'd outperform.
I think we would. I feel confident about that, actually.
I think you should have your own chart, Corey.
I would love to see my chart.
I'd love to make a Corey productivity chart. It would be very scary.
It would be terrifying. I don't even think I want to see it myself.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Our favorite topic now, suddenly something that people are starting to look at. Non-permanent residents in Canada surpassed 2.5 million, with the largest growth in work permits and study permits. So this was something that was talked about before the election, during the election, but again, it continues to be a persistent problem. And it definitely will be affecting, depending upon whether this path continues or whether it curtails, the rental market. And it will have a direct impact on unemployment, which is something that we've been seeing in the data. And it's a real problem, especially when it comes to youth employment. Now, AI is factoring into this as well.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of this non-permanent residence in Canada is becoming a real problem because we just don't have the infrastructure to really support this. But again, it just sort of is what it is.
I found these numbers to be shocking, and I found it very frustrating that this was not front and center of the election, and we just got so distracted by the Trump narrative that we didn't really focus on a lot of our domestic issues. And one of these just got suppressed with so much conversation about the pending crisis that we never really talked about this. And this is just coming front and center. And I think we're going to see this as being a hot topic when the House of Commons finally resumes next week, Parliament, which is just so long overdue. So I think this will be front and center starting next week.
Awesome. I'm sure the media will be all over this topic. Next one, we're going to talk about unemployment weakness. So Canada lost 106,000 jobs in the past 2 months, with 66,000 in August alone. So this is something really to be thinking about as well in terms of the strength of our economy and also just where this weakness is coming from. And it's interesting because if you look at youth unemployment, it's record highs.
Mhm.
And there's all kinds of, I can't believe some of the stuff that Doug Ford is saying about this topic. But at the end of the day, it's a real problem. And when you have young people who just can't get a job or feel that there's a hope in their future or want to have a stake in society or are able to even have a stake in society, let alone a house, it's a real fundamental problem that will eventually rear itself into all kinds of other problems. And so I hope this is something that gets rectified. Some of this obviously ties into the issues that we're seeing with non-permanent residents at 2.5 million, but all of it as well, or part of it as well, can tie into AI. And so it's a lot of weakening data. But the one thing that I would say is that a lot of the unemployment generally is lower paid type jobs. And that's something to be thinking about, especially the way I look at it is I do think we're becoming more in the situation where it was a K-shaped economy. And we saw that during COVID, where we had a lot of unemployment and a lot of people at the bottom or lower economic rungs of society were really, really, really feeling the pinch. But everybody else was doing really well. When I say everybody else, I'm not talking about the middle class. I'm talking
Mhm.
about the upper middle class, the upper class, and the top 1%. Because money was really cheap and hard assets were flying. We're starting to see that already with talk of significant interest rate reductions. And all you have to do is just look at the stock market. They're anticipating a lot of cheap money coming down the pipeline. And we're seeing, even though a lot of unemployment from the bigger companies, especially out of the US, we're seeing some pretty big earnings come out as we have greater efficiencies due to AI. So it's a very interesting environment. I do think that we're going to see hard assets continue to outperform. And eventually, this may start to play into real estate and may start to impact which direction we see the market heading in, more specifically in low rise. I do think, and I think you would agree, Corey, as well, that we will see, just because of the amount of oversupply, challenges or softness in the condo market for probably a year or two to come. However, anecdotally, we are seeing a lot of first time condo buyers come to market, and we're starting to see that trend, at least anecdotally for Fox Marin, happen all across the city.
Yep, definitely. Just a couple things about this. I think this directly ties into the temporary foreign workers program. And again, when Parliament resumes next week, I think this is going to be a very, very hot topic. And I think it's very unfortunate that Canadian youth are really struggling to get jobs and how important those first jobs are for people in terms of formulating the direction of your life, your friendships, your confidence, your social networks, where you're what you're going to study, what interests you. And I just think it's really unfortunate that we're dealing with this. And I know that there's some kids out there that have been looking for jobs for 6 to 12 months to find entry level jobs just to get that experience on their resume. And I really hope that we see big debate about this starting next week.
The solution to this, in my opinion, is going to be small business. I don't think government can just keep hiring people as a solution to having a productive economy, which
Oh
is
my
what's been
God.
driving employment. It needs to be small business and they need to be supported in order to feel confident enough and be in an environment enough where they're incentivized to actually feel that there's a path forward to be able to hire people in the future. And that's just not happening here. And some of the earlier charts would be very clear of that. So very, 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 very interesting times. There's a lot of countervailing forces, but I do think we're going to see a lot cheaper money coming into the system over the next 3 to 6 months.
All right, let's just move towards how the numbers have been revealed as per the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board effective August. I think it's just going to be helpful to look quickly at how
Mhm.
the market's performing. One caveat I want to make here is that August is not really the best month to measure the market because it tends to be in the slowest month of the year. People are away, realtors are away, people are focused on their kids at camp and prepping for school and vacations. And it tends to be, it's also really hot in Toronto and properties
Yeah.
just feel soggy,
Humid.
humid.
Don't
So
forget about the humidity, Corey.
it's all about, it's the humidity chart,
Hair,
really.
the hair chart.
It's the hair chart. Yes.
Humidity hair index.
Exactly. If anyone complains about humidity the most, it's me. I'm so happy it's September. What a better weather. And properties do look better in September.
Our
Okay.
dogs here too.
Our dog is super supportive of that. I mean, they are wearing a fur coat all through the summer months. It's not exactly fair. So, quickly here, we're going to look at these four asset classes as we always do: detached, semi detached, townhouses, and condos. I'm just going to go through this quickly. You can see in the second column there that detached houses are down 10% versus last year in terms of average price. Semi-detached down 6.1% versus last year. And Ralph, this is going against our thesis that semi-detached were going to be the big hot commodity of 2025. So we're seeing a bit of a downward trajectory in that particular asset. Townhomes up just 1% versus last year at this time. And then, of course, condo apartments down just 2% versus last year. And then if you look at the right-hand column, you can see that volume is up slightly across the board with the exception of condos, which is no surprise, but it looks like more people are transacting due to the fact that there has been this price correction. We are seeing some, not a lot, some people returning to the market and trying to take advantage of some sort of softening or opportunity out there, opportunity to negotiate, maybe grab something at a good price. I know that we just recently sold as a great property in South Riverdale in August for what I felt was an exceptional price for the buyer. And if the buyer is listening, you guys killed it on that price point. So it'll be interesting to see how the numbers unfold going into September, October. I don't think we're going to see like a big bump here. I think we're going to see a little bit of more of the same across the board all the way up until the end of the year.
I think what's interesting here is seeing the further collapse of detached homes, just something that you don't normally see. Last month, we saw a softening in July, and we saw semis still in the 1-2 range or close to it. And I was expecting detached to bounce back up a little bit and semis to hold. But we've seen semis collapse almost in tandem with detached. So I find that very interesting to see that type of softening in the almost untouchable or thought to be untouchable low-rise aspect of the Toronto market. So keep your eyes on that, and where the bounce back will happen will be in that segment, probably more specifically led in the semi-detached. But again, it's definitely surprising and interesting, and we'll see what September brings.
What I find interesting about this, and we just touched upon this at the top of the podcast, is the market is, Toronto is full and packed full of money. Like there is money here. And so I'm so surprised to see these segments challenged versus the more, I'm saying this with air quotes, reasonable asset classes, and that the sort of the higher price points have been more affected when we know that there is money in that particular segment and not necessarily always somebody that needs to sell their condo to move up into a detached house. We don't really normally see that jump. So I do find that very interesting and kind of goes against our narrative about, the upper class or upper middle class doing quite fine in the current market conditions. And it's like the middle class that is struggling. So I'm finding this to like not necessarily align with our current perspective on where the market is and where the money is.
Well, I think the money's definitely there. I think it's choosing to sit on the sidelines. We were supposed to have a trade deal by July. That never happened. Now we're being told that no deal is the best deal in the world. And we've got the uncertainty of the Kuzma trade agreement coming up in the fall, starting to have conversations there. And so I think it's a continued narrative of uncertainty. The money hasn't gone anywhere. It's sitting there. It's just watching. And so the question is when does that demand start to come back? Some people, I'm sure, on our channel will say it's never coming back and we're going back to the apocalypse. But I do think it will come back. It'll be interesting to see the impact of the perception and the consensus narrative when it comes to interest rates. And as you and I both know, while we do have a lot of semi-detached and detached currently on the market, they aren't building anymore. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays in as immigration continues to rage in Toronto, which we say it's not, but we know it's out there. And it'll be interesting to see the numbers as they start to really come out.
You'd have to be blind not to realize that immigration is raging out there. Blind. A lot of people choose not to see things. So all home types, let's go over this quickly. Transactions. So transactions are overall, so that's the amount of deals going through the MLS system is up 2.3%. New listings coming online, so new inventory is up 9.4%, not surprising. Active listings sitting on the market, not selling through, up 22%, not surprising. The average price overall across all asset classes is down just 5.2% versus last August. which I don't think is like a massive difference. But when we look at where we were in the peak compared to where we are today, you're going to see a massive adjustment. We'll get to those slides shortly. And then the average days on market, things are taking longer to sell, almost 14% longer. Let's quickly talk about inventory. So our absorption rate right now, that's the amount of inventory we have on the market. How long would it take for us to eat through all of the supply if we were not to list one more new condo, semi-detached, triplex, duplex, and so on? And we're currently at a very high peak for this 2025. I think we're at our highest amount of inventory actually at 5.28 months.
Now, to keep that in mind, this is just across the board. Condos are just at around 7 months of inventory, maybe slightly over in that range. And so the condo market, very different from the rest of the Toronto real estate market, but still overall, we continue to see months of inventory building up.
Yes, we are. So let's just go over prices quickly because this is where everybody wants to focus on. And I always want to make sure that we're touching on this when we look at market stats. So we pulled the detached average price over the last 12 months for our viewers out there. This particular chart is specific to the 416. So you can see here that we've had it's like a few peaks and valleys. The height of the detached segment this year was surprisingly February. That's when we had our highest average price for detached homes. And you can see the market peak for this. So if you want to talk about the market peak overall, was February 2022. And the average detached home in February 2022 was just over $2 million. And now we're at hovering over $1.5 million, which is an adjustment down of 36%. So when we look at the last 12 months, it doesn't really feel like it feels like a little bit of a bumpy year, but not crazy. But if you compare it to the peak, we've 100% seen a big adjustment in this category, as you mentioned, Ralph, when we are touching on the price points in the segments. All right, let's move on to semi-detached. Same concept here. You can see the peak for semi-detached in 2025 was in March. The peak of the market in February 2022, the average semi was just under 1.5 million, which seems like yesterday to me. That seemed very like a typical price for a semi-detached in good areas. And then here we see in August, again, acknowledging that August is really just not the best month to pull an average price, but the average price there is 113. So there's been an adjustment down in this category since the peak of 32.5%. And let's do the same exercise for condos quickly. You can see the peak for condos surprisingly was June of this year.
Wow.
And I think we're going to see condos doing quite well this fall, as we briefly mentioned. At the peak, the average condo in the peak was 822,000. Right now, it's just hovering around 667,000, which is an adjustment down of 23.2%.
And I think when you said we're going to see condos do quite well, I think what you're meaning is maybe stabilizing. I don't think we're going to see anything shooting up. And it's so interesting. We have 8 agents on our team, and when we have our team meetings, we talk about the condo market, and it's just amazing to see how many buyers and buyer conversations we're having on the condo side of the equation that we just weren't having 3-6 months ago. So we are seeing a significant amount of activity on that side, and I do think we will start to see a little stabilization. Could there be further softness? Absolutely. But we are seeing a lot of activity, and it is something to watch, especially as interest rates continue to come down. We'll start to see a little more story of affordability on that side, especially for people who've been staying on the sidelines. And it is amazing. Like, we had a recent transaction. One of the agents on our team had a client buy a condo downtown studio, but bought a condo for $400,000. And I remember it was not very long ago where you had people coming to us saying, I'd like to buy a condo for $500,000. And we'd show them sales in the entire Toronto district, all of Toronto. And there maybe be 5 sales under 500,000. And believe me, they were not nice condos. So there is a change in affordability. And if you start to look at the cost to replace, in the future, knowing that there's going to be no supply coming online after about 2028, 2029, it does start to make an interesting story.
And thank you for correcting me because 100%, I did not mean to suggest that the market in the condo segment was going to fly in the fall. I just think it's going to be more of the same. And I think that there are buyers feeling more confident about getting into this segment because there's certainly been a price adjustment here, as you can see on this very chart. And I think people know that there's deals to be had and motivated sellers and opportunities to negotiate. So I think we'll see 100% more of the same, but I think we might see volume churn a little bit faster in this segment. All right, let's just quickly look here too, over the last 12 months at total sales volume. So as I mentioned, that is the amount of transactions going through the system. The peak was actually in October of 2024. That's not surprising to me. We definitely felt as we were moving towards Christmas that things were turning around. And I don't think any of us could have forecasted the direction things ended up going once everything ignited, as we all know about. So we saw 5,221 transactions in August. The peak of the market, there was over 9,000 transactions. So we're certainly seeing a correction there of about 75%. I do think that volume will increase as we head into the fall. And as I keep repeating, August just tends to be a slower month, as is the season around the Christmas period. And you can see that in this chart here, 100% we're slow in December, January, February, which makes a lot of sense knowing our climate. New listings coming online, which is always interesting to see as well. The biggest month over the last year was in May of 2025. New listings coming online in August was just over 14,000. Again, not too surprising due to seasonality. Market peak, we had over 15,000 new listings coming online. So an adjustment of 7.9% here. And it's not surprising that we were seeing more listings coming out in the peak. But the difference is there was more listings coming through, but they were selling through and we were not carrying the inventory month over month. Anything you want to add there, Ralph?
No, I think you're doing a great job.
Total months of inventory, we touched on this briefly. Currently, we're at 5.28 months. This is the peak of the year. So we have more inventory now available than we did any other time of the year. So if you are a seller out there, I really want you to be very conservative with your expectations. You're competing against a lot of other product out there, both in the condo segment and the low rise segment. So you have to be very conservative with expectations. There is absolutely zero FOMO out there. There's no sense of urgency. Buyers know that there is selection out there and there'll be more opportunities to come. So people are not rushing to put pen to paper. A huge, huge marker here, just in terms of change of velocity. At the peak of the market, we had about 3 weeks of supply. 3 weeks of supply, which is about 0.76 months of supply in comparison to 5.28 months. And that is a difference of 594%.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I think the takeaway here is if you're thinking about selling a property, now is not the time to get experimental and hire somebody who just got their license. It's really important to interview agents and find the absolute best fit because it is not going to be sexy. It is not going to be fun. It's going to be a bit of an odyssey, and you really need to have somebody that you feel is going to give you the best possible representation and exposure, and somebody that you feel you can work through a very challenging environment. Because even if things start to stabilize, which we are starting to expect, it's going to be a challenging market for a long time to come. And interviewing agents and looking for that right fit is really going to be the difference in a lot of outcomes between success and failure, between some level of happiness and misery. So do your research and really, really make sure you're finding the best possible representation.
It's going to be a grind, my friends.
Oh, yes.
All right, Ralph, let's just touch on the last slide here before we wrap up for the day. I know you wanted to add in power of sales. I think this is really interesting to see. why don't you walk our viewers through this chart?
Yeah, it looks like there's been a significant increase, a record high actually in power of sales. And you can see that reflected in this chart. And this was circulating both on X, and there's been a few articles, I believe I read one in the Toronto Star talking about this. So we are seeing an increase in power of sales to a point that we've never seen before. Accordingly, I'm not seeing it on MLS, but it's saying it's almost as high as 3.5% of listings. So it looks like there's a surge happening. So again, something to keep your eye on. We did have Jason Friesen from Outline Financial on a couple weeks ago, and he was looking at the data. In terms of defaults, we're still very, very low. We are seeing an uptick, but relative to the US and other countries, it doesn't seem like it's a real systemic concern, but it is something to keep your eye on as people continue to trouble to carry properties given the inflation that people are facing on day-to-day lives and the challenges that they're having with carrying their properties, especially as we're seeing a softness in the rental market. So I think a reprieve on rates will definitely be very, very welcome to the overall market.
I think I'd really welcome a better pricing on groceries. Like, it's just nauseating at this point.
Yeah. Let's start with blueberries and yogurt.
I would go raspberries and yogurt.
I would go steak, actually. It's just getting obscene when you go to a butcher and you're just like, really? I mean, I know it's grass-fed, but really?
I know. Like, have you ever been watching the scale when they weigh it, and then you see the little price cup on the scale, and you're like, you know what? Forget it. Just like, that's insane. Like, I'm like, I feel like there was a time you could go to Morton's and get a whole dinner for that price point, let alone just a raw steak on a piece of paper that they wrap up for you that you have to barbecue at home. I'm always like, oh, I didn't realize it was that expensive. So yeah, feeling the vibes. This is a little bit depressing, all these numbers, to be honest, but I do think that we're in for a very interesting ride this fall, and I'm not necessarily feeling optimistic. I'm feeling a little bit more of the same, but I definitely think that there is going to be some strings pulled to try to bounce back from this.
Cheap money. That's what they're going to do. More spending, more stimulus, more inflation. They're going to, especially out of the US, but they're going to look to have two, which is the 2%, which is where, based on whatever data they're using at the time, but 2% is based on where they wanted to see inflation. I think you're going to see that move to 3% with AI coming down the pipeline, which is naturally deflationary long-term to support all the unemployment and hopefully support small business. I think you'll see much, much lower rates over the next 6 months to a year from now. That will have a stimulatory effect on the stock market, on hard assets, and perhaps may even start to trickle down into the Toronto real estate market. But who knows? Who knows? So I think we're wrapping up our conversation. Kori, thank you so much, as always, for all the hard work that goes into putting these charts together. Again, if you had your own productivity chart, I think you would be off the charts. So thank you so much.
When I pulled those together at 11 o'clock last night. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really difficult to be a podcaster and a real estate broker, but that's a whole other story. Maybe we should do a podcast on that. If you've made it to the end of this rambling conversation, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning into the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. We would really, 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 really appreciate if you could hit that like or subscribe button. If you have any comments, please be sure to make a comment down below. We are always reachable if you want to speak to one of us direct or someone on our team that can help you in making a real estate related decision or anything else for that matter. Kori, what do you like to say at this point?
I'd like to say contact us anytime because we're super nice and we can be really fun and hilarious at times.
Yes, at times.
Thanks so much, Ralph, for your great brain. I really appreciate all of your insights. As always, you're one smart guy. I hope everybody understands that and respects that as much as I do. And we'll catch you guys all next week.